I've spent a lot of time sitting by rivers, just staring at the moving water, mesmerized, and I very often think about how I would paint it, even if I'm not painting it. And over time, I figured out a couple things to focus on when I first sit down to start a scene like this. So let's break an example down into three sections. First, we have the reflection, which is usually the sky reflecting off the surface of the water. And of course, the shape and color, even the size of the reflection, will change depending on your exact scene. So just get used to looking for those reflections. Typically, they're blue or gray or white, or if it's a sunset, that will be reflecting the ambient color in the sky. Sometimes you'll also see nearby objects reflected, like trees or bushes, and just need to make those mental notes before we start painting. And then we have what's below the water, which is almost the most important thing, especially when it comes to color and value. But color, especially because this really tells the story of our scene. In Scotland, our river water is often very brownish or reddish or orangish because of all the peat. This changes how the rocks look below the surface, especially when we have a bit of sunlight pouring through the water. It often casts very orange or yellow glows on the different surfaces of the rocks. And then in the deeper sections, we'll get kind of a gradient down into the murky greens and browns. And lastly, I'll make a mental note about what's coming out of the water. It could be fallen logs, rocks, bushes, all sorts of things. So I'll look closely at the textures I see, how bright or dark it is, and I'll also look at how the color changes or the value changes when it goes down into the water. And I know all of that sounds like a lot, but the more you do it, the more you get used to looking at these things, and it becomes a lot easier to sit down and start painting. Because gouache can easily be diluted and used in a very wet into wet way, as well as layered up thick and used with opacity, it offers a lot of versatility for a scene like this, and I like to use both strategies almost equally. I like to start by painting what's below the surface of the water. So very often this is a mixture of browns, reds, orangey colors, but also a lot of gray. In the shallow sections, I'm putting a lot more yellow and brown and orange into it. And in the deeper sections, I'm adding much more blue, which is shifting everything down into like a bluish, greenish gray. If we take a quick look at this scene, it's the perfect example of how we see a lot of beautiful gradients below the surface of the water. Where the rocks rise up almost to the surface of the water, we're going to see a lot more yellow, and as they plunge down into the depths of the river, it shifts quickly down into a deep, almost indigo, sometimes even blackish red color. Hey everyone, quick little break to let you know that my new book, Sketching Scotland Volume 2, is now available on my web shop. We've restocked Volume 1, now with Volume 2. The other books are there as well, along with some prints. So if you're interested, if you missed the Kickstarter and you've been hearing me talk about it a lot or seeing it online, now is your chance to get a copy. Speaking of Kickstarter, we have now officially sent all the books out. Every person we had an address for has their books on the way or has already received them. If you have not received an email from us with your tracking number, that means we don't have your address. There's still like 30 of you that need to give me your address, so please get in touch. But yeah, I'm so excited to see people getting the books and enjoying them and also making plans to visit Scotland. Okay, back to the video. I do want to warn you that when you paint a scene like this, it is very often going to look absolutely crazy, totally abstract, messy, muddy, just chaotic for a while. And that is totally okay. That is part of the process. Right now, we are setting the stage for all of our next steps. So all I've done up until this point is give myself a base to work on top of. And the beautiful thing about gouache is that it can always be re-wetted and softened. So any of the edges or colors you see when you first start can be shifted and adjusted. One of my strategies is to start with a bit of this saturation and then come back in and layer a bit of gray and darker tones on top of it, and then also layer in a bit of opacity in brighter yellows and oranges for any of my sunspots. At this stage in the painting, I'm kind of squinting at my reference, or if I'm outside painting in person, I'm constantly squinting my eyes to minimize all the detail I can see. This helps me focus on bigger shapes, bigger sections of darkness or lightness, and that means I don't get bogged down in any particular detail too soon because it's going to change a lot before the end of the painting. In terms of brushwork, the cool thing about this kind of scene is that it benefits us to be a little bit messy. Having splotches and like blooming effects in the paint, and also using a very dry, scratchy effect with the brush, messing up the paint, scrubbing the paint. All of these things help give the illusion of water moving over rocks because what's below the surface is very distorted. We're hardly ever going to have perfectly crisp edges. Even though at first glance you might think you can see a ton of detail below the surface, if you really look close, almost every edge is just a little bit squiggly. So we can either use like jagged, rough edges, or we can just soften different edges together. You can try laying some color down, letting it dry, and then coming back in with a damp brush and softening an edge, which again is one of the benefits of gouache. And when it comes time to actually start defining some of the rocks below the surface, I will usually start by drawing an outline around some of them with different colors, shifting between darks and lighter browns. And then I can come back and soften any of the edges that are just a bit too crisp. For the majority of the painting, I'm ignoring the reflections I see. Those will come last. Those are going to be more opaque on top of all of this work that I'm doing now. So I can just have fun with creating a bunch of these abstract marks and kind of see where it takes me. And I'm not focused on painting every single rock that I can see in my reference. I'm using it as loose inspiration, just trying to capture the feel and the colors that I see. Just keep in mind that if you want to draw focus to any particular area, you can use a bit more contrast or intense saturation. This will catch the eye right away because there's so much gray and midtones around it. When I paint the reflection on the surface of the water, I'm using dry brush textures, which means I'm getting the brush mostly dry, dipping it in the paint, and hopefully by now my white paint is a little bit drier and stickier. And then I'm gently brushing that over the surface of the paper, which just catches a bit of the texture on the paper and gives you that very broken color effect. I want to avoid using wet, bold lines for the reflection just for now. I may do that in some areas, but just to get started, I want to capture almost like that glittery effect we see on moving water. So the dry brush effect is perfect for that. For the reflection, I will often start with mostly white with just a hint of blue mixed in. Obviously, it depends on the color of the reflection I see, but usually it's like a light blue. And you can see I'm kind of jumping around to different sections of the painting. Part of the reason for that is I can let some areas dry while I work on others, and that kind of speeds up the process, I guess. And even though my focus is the beautiful rocks below the surface of the water, I still need to give some definition to the nearby areas, or at least give it a little context. Sometimes developing one area a little bit further helps you understand what needs to happen next to it. And other times you need to define everything more vaguely and then slowly build up detail layer by layer. I guess it kind of depends on the scene. In this kind of situation, I'm practicing how I would approach it if I was outside. The most important thing would be capturing what I see below the water, below my focus, just in case the light changed or the weather changed and I had to pack out and leave really quick. The rest of the painting didn't matter as much to me. But of course, since I'm home, I can take my time with it and do it as I need to. And actually, I came back the next day to finish the painting. But mostly while I'm painting this, I'm trying to really be conscious of each choice, instill these lessons into me so that when I'm outside, all of this is a lot more natural and more intuitive. One of my favorite parts of doing a scene like this is painting these little directional lines where I'm following the contours of the water moving around the rocks, all these little tiny white marks. It's a lot of fun, and I think it really gives the painting some movement and kind of shows the flow of the water. But I also love doing these little touches of light on the rocks below the surface. In an area where it's a little more shadowy or deeper down, I will use a darker gray, maybe leaning into blues or greens with a hint of brown in it almost always. And then in the shallow sections, I use much more pure yellow or orange, which makes it look like light is really catching the edge of those rocks. On the edge of the rock, just on the lip where it meets the water, there's often going to be a very dark shadow line, as well as along the shoreline where the grass or the rocks or the dirt meets the river. So remember that chaos we started with? Learning to trust the process is the only way to get through it. And I know the first few times will be very challenging, but just get through it. It's going to take a lot of repetition to start feeling comfortable. And if you enjoy this type of instruction, this is exactly what I do over on my Patreon every single month. If you want to level up your gouache skills and just improve your landscape painting in general, please consider subscribing over there because that's really what keeps me going. It's what supports me. And we have a great art community over there who love to encourage each other and share what they're working on. Okay, I am gonna head out now, finish editing this video, and hopefully you enjoy it, get some inspiration, and next time you're out hiking and you find a beautiful river, maybe you're inspired to paint it. All right, take care, everyone. I will see you again next time. Bye bye.